Hi, I'm Naomi. I wrote a book in stolen moments, dawn hours before my kids woke up, lunch breaks at a thankless job, and nights when the house finally fell silent. When it finally found a publisher, I invited my sister to help with the launch, because she needed work and I believed family meant something. 2 weeks later, at my first reading, she turned to a room full of bookstore patrons and said, "It's just Vanity publishing." That night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, she sat across from me at our favorite cafe and asked, "So, how much are you actually making from this hobby?" I slid her phone across the table. On the screen was an email from Oprah's producer. Inside, an invitation and her termination as my publicist. But what hurt more than the betrayal was that no one in my family questioned her version of events. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I handed her the phone. One single email from Oprah's team. That sentence had been circling my mind for days now. Quiet, weighty, final. I didn't scream. I didn't lash out. I didn't burn bridges. I handed her undeniable proof and walked away. It's funny, that wasn't even the most expensive thing she took from me. The memory resurfaced this morning when I found an old coffee-stained manuscript page tucked beneath a stack of rejection letters. Scribbled in the margins were notes from 3 years ago. Me sitting at my kitchen table, exhausted, holding a cup of gas station coffee with "Final Draft" written in purple marker. My first publishing offer had just come through. We'd negotiated a modest advance of $5,000. I was exhausted. I was proud. That was the day I'd started believing maybe, just maybe, I wasn't delusional for pursuing this dream after all. And just a few weeks later, she walked in. It was still autumn. Boston chill barely creeping through poorly insulated windows. My apartment had 3 bookshelves and a secondhand desk that wobbled unless you placed a folded receipt under the right leg. I was juggling email responses to my new editor while trying to figure out why the formatting on Chapter 7 kept glitching. I remember the door swinging open. My sister Vanessa walked in without knocking, designer sunglasses perched on her head, an oversized tote slung over her shoulder. "You free?" she asked, dropping into the only chair not covered in manuscript pages. "I mean, define free," I joked, rubbing my temples and pushing aside the stack of edits. She let out a breath that sounded somewhere between tired and defeated. "Got let go this morning. Agency downsizing again." I paused. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I looked at her, really looked at her. Same hazel eyes as mine, but sharper. Always sharper. Vanessa had this way of entering a room like she was doing it a favor, even when she was the one asking for help. We were only 18 months apart, but I'd always felt like the older one. Maybe because I'd been the one picking up extra shifts. Since high school, paying bills while she interned at glossy magazines and built a portfolio of connections. Mom's voice echoed in my head like a mantra. "You've always been the practical one, Naomi. Help your sister." I nodded slowly. "You want to help with the book launch? I mean, I could use someone with marketing experience. The publisher's publicity budget is minimal." She blinked. "Wait, you're serious? That little memoir thing actually sold?" It stung, but I let it go. Yes, it did. 6-figure deal. I exaggerated, tripling the actual amount. I don't know why I felt the need to impress her. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Okay, sure. I mean, I guess it could be good experience while I look for something real." I pushed a contract toward her. 3-month agreement, standard industry rates. For a moment I thought, maybe this could be the thing that finally bridges the gap between us. A week passed. She showed up on time. She drafted press releases, even brought coffee once. Then, one afternoon, I found something that stopped me cold. On her laptop screen sat an email draft to my publishing contacts. Subject line: Publicity update for Naomi West's memoir. I skimmed the text and froze at the signature. Vanessa West, Publicity Director, West Literary. I blinked, looked again, laughed at first. Had to be a mistake, right? Later that evening, I asked her about it. "Oh," she said casually, slipping off her shoes at my kitchen table. "It just sounded better for pitches, branding." "Branding," I repeated, trying to keep my voice even. "Yeah," she said, mouthful of leftover pasta. "Like, assistant sounds small. Director gives it more legitimacy. Journalists love that stuff." I nodded slowly, but something shifted in my chest. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was warning. Mom came by the apartment a few days later to drop off homemade banana bread. She looked at the business cards Vanessa had printed, pointing proudly to the embossed lettering. "You girls make a good team," she said, beaming. "Always knew you would." I smiled. I thanked her. But something about the way she looked at Vanessa, like she finally saw a version of her that made sense. And me, I just faded into the background. The one who wrote the words, revised the drafts, endured the rejections, negotiated the contract. But I told myself it didn't matter. It's not the title that matters, it's the work, I whispered that night while staring at the ceiling. But deep down I knew. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She said it was just for branding, but I should have listened to my gut. It didn't hit me all at once. The shift came like fog on a Massachusetts morning. Slow, creeping, suffocating only when you realized you hadn't seen clearly in hours. It was a Friday evening at an independent bookstore in Cambridge, my first public reading. The space was intimate. Exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, the comforting scent of paper and possibility. I had just finished reading a passage from Chapter 3 when a woman in wire-rimmed glasses, notepad in hand, turned to me with genuine curiosity. "What inspired you to write such a personal story?" she asked, pen poised. I opened my mouth, but Vanessa leaned forward from her position by the refreshment table, voice cutting through the quiet like she was doing everyone a favor. "It's actually an interesting publishing story," she said brightly. "Traditional publishers rarely take risks on unknown writers these days." Naomi went with a small press, really more of a vanity publisher that charges authors, but I helped shape it into something marketable. The room seemed to freeze. I felt my jaw tighten, but I smiled. I always smiled. The woman's eyes flickered between us, confusion evident. "Oh, I thought Riverstone was a legitimate independent publisher," she said. "They are," I managed to say, voice steadier than I felt. "They're small, but respected. And they absolutely didn't charge me. They paid in advance." Vanessa laughed. Lightly. "A token advance. Let's be real about the industry, right? Nothing wrong with alternative paths." The rest of the night was a blur of lukewarm wine in plastic cups, forced smiles, and pretending I didn't hear her retell my publishing journey in a new key, one where she rescued my manuscript from obscurity, and I simply provided the raw material for her expertise. The drive home was silent. I tried to convince myself she was just nervous, just talking, just branding, right? But later that night, back at home, the unease crawled under my skin and refused to let go. I sat on the edge of my bed, kicked off my shoes, and pulled up. Instagram? I don't even know why. Instinct, maybe. There it was. Her profile photo had changed. Glamour shot perfectly staged in front of my book cover. Vanessa West, literary publicist and content strategist. I clicked. Her bio opened with a lyrical paragraph about discovering voices and amplifying stories in a crowded marketplace. My name didn't appear until the third line. Currently guiding debut author and sister, Naomi West through the publishing landscape. Guiding. Like I was a lost tourist and she was the seasoned local. I stared at the screen long enough for it to blur. The word publicist echoed in my head. She hadn't helped build this. She hadn't even believed in it until it existed. Restructuring a young writer's career, her latest post claimed. She was taking credit for my 5 years of pre-dawn writing sessions, for the 78 rejections before the yes, for the 12 drafts that broke me and rebuilt me. The next morning, I waited until we were in the apartment alone. The others on our small launch team were out distributing promotional materials. Hey. I began gently, sliding into the seat across from her. I was looking at your Instagram last night. Her eyes stayed on her screen, but her mouth curved slightly upward. Yeah, got over 100 new followers since the reading. I noticed your bio. It says you're guiding my career. Vanessa glanced up. It's just messaging, Nye. Readers don't care about the boring behind-the-scenes stuff. They want a story. But I built this story, I said, keeping my voice even. Could we maybe update it just to clarify the roles a bit? She cut in. And you hate public speaking. I'm just giving us visibility. Don't overthink it. I nodded slowly, but inside something folded. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was that quiet, crumpling feeling like watching someone take credit for your test answers in slow motion. On Sunday, we had lunch at Mom's like always. Same kitchen, same chairs we'd sat in since childhood. Mom pulled a newspaper from her bag, waving it like a trophy. Look who made the local arts section, she said proudly. My girl. She held it up. Quarter-page photo of Vanessa with the caption, Vanessa West, the force behind invisible threads. My book title, my words, my life distilled onto pages. I froze mid-bite. Mom beamed. Told you she'd find her calling. Vanessa laughed, modest but clearly pleased. I nodded, pushing quinoa around my plate. So I'm the shadow behind her spotlight now. I didn't say it aloud. I rarely did. That night, I stayed late at my writing desk, mostly to breathe. The phone rang around 9:30. It was Dr. Morgan Hansen, the literature professor I'd interviewed. During my research phase, the kind who still sent handwritten thank you notes, just wanted to say congrats, he said warmly. Vanessa mentioned you're splitting the royalties 50-50 now. That's generous considering it's your story. I blinked. Right. Thank you. We hung up. I sat there staring at my author website. It hadn't been updated in nearly a month. Same modest description. Same candid photo taken by a friend. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over a bio until the bio became the truth. But truth in my family was always a matter of who spoke first and loudest. By the time I pulled into my mother's driveway that Sunday, the sun had already dipped behind the triple-deckers of our Somerville neighborhood. I was 20 minutes late on purpose. I needed the mental buffer. I sat in the car for a beat, checked, my lipstick in the rearview mirror, and reminded myself, smile, nod, swallow. Inside, the air smelled of roast chicken, rosemary, and maple-glazed carrots. Familiar, grounding, and vaguely guilt-inducing. Oh, look, Mom chirped the moment I walked in, handing off my jacket like I was a guest in my childhood home. The writer is here. She pointed, not to me, but to Vanessa, who was already seated at the head of the table, wineglass in hand. My cousin Jeremy laughed appreciatively, and his wife Caroline smiled politely. I paused just for half a breath. Then I smiled, of course, and slid into my usual seat, the one furthest from the serving dishes. Nobody corrected her. It wasn't just online anymore. My mother repeated the lie like gospel, and everyone played along like we were in church, and no one dared to challenge the sermon. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries, updates about Uncle Ray's hip replacement, Mom's community garden drama, and the neighbor's boundary dispute. But it didn't take long before the spotlight shifted. Vanessa's been approached by 2 more authors. Mom announced proudly, passing the green beans with flair. "Tell them about your strategy, honey." Vanessa dabbed the corner of her mouth, then launched into a well-practiced monologue about platform building, media relationships, and influencer partnerships. She spoke in a rhythm that made it sound like she invented those concepts. Not once did she mention the nights I stayed up rewriting press materials that she'd drafted in corporate jargon, the hours I spent coaching her on my book's themes while she half-listened, texting. "I really think we're ready to scale," she finished, lifting her glass. "It's time." And then Mom turned to me. "You're lucky your sister knows publishing. Otherwise, your stories would just be journal entries." The room laughed again. Softer, but still enough to sting. I reached for my water, not trusting my mouth to stay polite. Across the table, my cousin's husband Matt caught my eye and mouthed, "Sorry." I couldn't even look at him. Instead, my mind drifted back to 3 years ago. To a cramped studio. Apartment where I sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by literary journal rejections and half-eaten ramen. I had submitted my first essay with trembling hands and tear-blurred vision. The acceptance email came 2 weeks later, offering $150 for 3,000 words of my life. I held my phone like it contained fire and called Mom with my voice breaking. She'd said, "That's nice, honey," and immediately asked if I'd spoken to Vanessa about her breakup. That was the real beginning, not the Instagram narrative, not the publicity director card, just me alone with a secondhand laptop, coffee shop Wi-Fi that dropped during important emails, and a belief I didn't dare say aloud. Now here I was, surrounded by people I'd known my entire life, and somehow I felt invisible. After dinner, the plates were stacked, and people wandered to the living room. I lingered at the sink, rinsing dishes under warm water, letting it run over my fingers longer than necessary. Their voices floated in from the other room. "She doesn't need recognition," my mother said. "She just needs stability. She'll never be the face of anything." "Naomi's always been happier in the background," Vanessa replied, a shrug in her voice. "She doesn't have that public persona." I didn't move. Not because I was afraid they'd know I was listening, but because a part of me already knew this was what they said when I wasn't around. Stability, like I was a backup generator. Convenient, reliable, never seen until the power went out. I dried my hands, gathered my things quietly, and slipped out the front door without saying goodbye. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. In the car, the glow of my dashboard illuminated my face in the dark. I opened my email, pulled up the old file. Book contract, Riverstone Press, author Naomi West. Everything in my name. My name. But when everyone around you tells the same story long enough, even the truth starts to sound like an interruption. They didn't just rewrite the story. They cast me out of it. And the worst part? No one seemed to notice I was gone. It was a Tuesday evening when my first bookstore event took place. The skyline of Boston glittered behind me as I stepped out of the lift into the Back Bay neighborhood, brick townhouses looming like sentinels against the darkening sky. I adjusted my name tag, Naomi West, author, and walked in, pretending I didn't already feel out of place. Vanessa had arrived early. Of course she had. She floated across the room in a burgundy jumpsuit, laughing at just the right pitch, touching elbows like she'd invented rapport. People clustered around her as if drawn by gravity. I lingered near the welcome table for a moment, smiling politely. No one asked who I was. A few glanced at my tag and nodded with that empty sort of courtesy reserved for the help and the hangers-on. I watched my book, my story being narrated in someone else's voice. It felt like listening to your favorite song covered by a mediocre band. The melody slowed just enough, the key changed just slightly, making it unrecognizable. The moment that gutted me was quiet, almost casual. A journalist from the Boston Globe approached. Tall woman, tortoiseshell glasses, reporter's notebook in hand. I opened my mouth, ready to greet her, extend a hand, reclaim some ground. But Vanessa was faster. "This is my sister," she said, sliding beside me with a practiced grin. "She's the writer I told you about. I handle the publishing side." "The writer?" The word came out like an afterthought. The journalist chuckled. "Ah, the one who provides the raw material. Every publishing team needs a content creator." I blinked. My throat tightened. I glanced at Vanessa. No wink, no nudge, no playful smirk to tell me it was a joke. Just a nod, a confirming smile. She meant it. I wasn't an author. I wasn't even a professional. I was a provider of raw materials in her publishing empire. I excused myself with a tight smile, weaving through the crowd like I'd suddenly remembered an urgent call. In the bookstore's single-stall bathroom, I locked myself in, leaned against the door, and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My palms trembled. I sat on the closed toilet lid and pulled out my phone, opened my publisher's website. My author page was still there, but my bio had changed. Now it read, "Naomi West works with her sister Vanessa West to bring authentic stories to readers seeking connection." The original 300-word paragraph about my writing journey, my influences, my vision, gone, like it had never existed. That was the night I stopped crying. I wanted to, but something inside me wouldn't allow it anymore. I wiped my lipstick clean, straightened my blouse, and walked out. The air outside was cooler. Or maybe I'd just gone numb. I left the event before the reading started. No one stopped me. No one texted. No one even asked the next day why I had disappeared. The following morning at my apartment, the energy was bright. Vanessa breezed in, holding a box of scones and recounting stories from the bookstore event. Everyone hovered around the kitchen island, laughing, nodding. "Your reading was amazing," said Kelsey from the publishing house marketing team. Vanessa shrugged, feigning modesty, just bringing Naomi's words to life. Our words. I walked past the group and into my writing room, closed the door, sat at my desk, and stared at the walls like I was seeing them for the first time. There were no framed reviews, no launch party photos, no visible proof I existed beyond the manuscript pages and email threads. A junior publicist from Riverstone, Jordan, peeked in after a knock. "Hey, sorry," he said. "Do you have that media kit or just the final manuscript?" Just that word again. I smiled without showing teeth. "Both." He nodded and left. I turned to my drawer, pulled out the original publishing contract. Every line, every clause, every signature. Mine. My name. My copyright. My story. But as I sat there, the truth hit harder than ink or legal language ever could. I had the title. She had the room. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was replaying what had happened, but because I had finally stopped pretending it wasn't happening. Instead of drafting a confrontational email or calling my agent, I did something quieter. I went to the bookshelf, pulled out a fresh moleskin notebook I'd been saving. I wrote the date on the inside cover. Then at the top of the first page, I wrote, "The Invisible Author, Notes on Literary Theft." It wasn't a plan yet, but it was a start. That night, I started paying attention, and that's when I saw what she'd done to my author bio. It was late on a Thursday, and the apartment was nearly empty. A soft hum from the refrigerator was the only sound after the last visitor had gone. I stayed behind to review one final interview transcript before my upcoming podcast appearance. It was supposed to be routine, a task I could do with my eyes half closed. But something caught my attention. The email introducing me to the podcast host didn't include my full bio. Instead, it said, "Naomi West, writer working with publishing strategist Vanessa West on the memoir Invisible Threads." The writer credit had always been author Naomi West. It was how we registered the copyright, how we filed with the Library of Congress, how every piece of marketing had been structured for the past year. I opened the previous 2 media pitches. Same thing, then another. 3 in a row, all positioning me as a writer, not an author, working under Vanessa's strategic guidance. I opened the original pitches we'd saved in our shared Google Drive. The versions I'd approved still had author Naomi West. The final emails didn't. She didn't just diminish me, she repositioned me. I sat back in my chair, jaw tight, eyes dry. I didn't slam the laptop shut or storm into her room like the movies teach you. Instead, I started a folder. Media Misrepresentations, I labeled it. And then I kept reading. Over the weekend, I called Lena. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 months, but she'd always been sharp, insightful, and had graduated with highest honors from Columbia's publishing program. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Wow, been a while. I didn't waste time. I laid it out as plainly as I could. If I'm credited as the author in my contract, but someone else repeatedly introduces me as just the writer to media contacts, and I didn't object at the time, does that damage my professional standing? There was a pause on her end. Then, calmly. Technically, yes, it's risky, especially if your silence is documented. It might not be fraud, but in publishing, perception becomes reality fast. Credits and roles matter. She added, "You need to be careful. If this has been happening for a while, someone's reshaping your narrative, and you're letting them." That stung. Not because she was wrong, but because I already knew it. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stared out the window of my kitchen, the mug in my hand long gone cold. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was a strategy. And I'd been too trusting to see it for what it was. Sunday arrived with that false spring sunshine. Too bright for March, not warm enough to forget winter. We had brunch at my mother's like we always did. Challah French toast, bacon, coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon. Vanessa was already seated when I arrived. She wore pearl earrings and that cream cashmere sweater she liked, the one she always said photographed well for professional headshots. Mom slid a white envelope across the table toward her. "Just a little something. I'm so proud of you for taking Naomi's story and making something of it." I froze mid-bite. Vanessa opened it casually. Inside was a card that read, "For the publishing mind who saw potential where others saw journaling." She smiled sweetly like she'd earned it. Inside the card was a check. I caught the amount out of the corner of my eye, but it wasn't the 4 figures that bothered me. It was the handwriting on the check memo. For launching a real author. I looked at Mom. She blinked, cheeks flushed. "What?" "I'm just acknowledging how far you've both come." "Sure." I didn't say another word, but inside something slipped out of alignment. I wasn't just losing my book. I was losing the people I wrote it for. The worst part? I had no one to tell, no one who'd see the weight behind that envelope. Back home, I sat on my couch in leggings and silence, flipping through my phone. A few text messages, a calendar reminder, an email about an upcoming book club appearance. Then I opened my camera roll by accident and landed on a short video. Marissa, a debut author I'd met at a workshop last month, giving a reading at a local literary festival. She'd worked on her novel for 6 years. In the video, she starts to read, then gets interrupted by the moderator who laughs and adds, "Of course, Marissa's work was extensively edited by her publisher." Marissa laughs too, nervously. She doesn't push back, doesn't reclaim her voice. I paused the clip, the look in her eyes. I recognized it. I'd worn that same expression for months. Later that week, I caught her at a coffee shop near the public library, stirring honey into a chai latte with her name scribbled across the cup in green marker. "Hey," I said, "I saw your reading. It was beautiful." She smiled. "Thanks. I kind of got talked over at the end, though." "Why didn't you correct them?" Marissa shrugged, eyes dropping to her cup. didn't want to seem difficult, I guess. Difficult. That word stayed with me all night. How many times had I stepped back just to avoid that label? How many times had I been told I was too sensitive, too particular, too private, as if those things disqualified me from owning my creation? Monday morning, 6:48 a.m. I arrived at my desk before anyone else. The light from my laptop reflected off the window as I laid out every altered bio, printed email, interview transcript, and publishing document I could find. The apartment still smelled faintly of yesterday's takeout curry. I closed the door, opened my moleskin notebook. Page New Saws 2, Phase 1, Documentation. Phase 2, Response. At the bottom, I wrote one word and circled it 3 times. Reclaim. She wanted to know what she'd get out of this book, so I gave her the answer. Monday morning came with a thick layer of fog hanging over Boston, as if even the weather was unsure of itself. I arrived earlier than usual, and the apartment had that strange stillness it only carried before 7 a.m. Quiet, expectant, like it was holding its breath. I had barely finished stirring almond milk into my coffee when I heard her key in the lock. Vanessa didn't knock. She pushed the door open like she owned the lease, not me, and lowered herself into the chair across from my desk as if summoned for a royal audience. No greeting, no soft landing. She looked at me with that unnerving calm she reserved for negotiations and said, "So, what's the next step for our book launch?" She folded her hands, rested her elbows on my manuscript pages, and tilted her head, just enough to make it feel like she was doing me a favor by showing up. "I'm thinking we need to talk compensation," she added. Percentage-based, obviously. I didn't answer right away. I let silence sit between us for a moment. Let her stew in it. Then I asked, "Why now?" Her smile didn't falter. "I've transformed this entire launch. Let's be honest. You had a manuscript and a tiny publisher when I walked in. I've brought in the media attention, Naomi. You needed someone who could stand in the spotlight, and I did. I've earned my stake." I reached to my right and slid a manila folder across the desk. Slow and deliberate. 6 interviews, I said. Each one with my name as author in the prep email and writer or content creator in your final communications. She didn't touch the folder. "You misrepresented my role in my own book," I continued. "You repositioned me, and you never asked." Vanessa blinked, just once, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. "You're being dramatic. I made your little memoir presentable. You never liked attention. That doesn't mean I wanted to be erased." I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, opened my email, and laid it flat on the desk. My fingers rested on the screen for a second, then I slid it toward her. She looked down at it like she expected something trivial. The subject line read, "Invitation from Oprah's book club." "You wanted to know the next step?" I said. "Here it is." She lifted her chin. "Oprah's team reached out to you?" "To me, not to Vanessa West Publishing, not to the writer working with publicist Vanessa West, to Naomi West, author." Her hand moved to pick up the phone but froze halfway. "And your services won't be needed," I added. "They've already connected me with their publicity team." The color drained from her face so gradually I almost missed it, like watching a sunset in time-lapse. First her cheeks, then her lips, finally leaving her looking paper white against her burgundy top. "Is this a joke?" she finally managed. "No, but that Instagram bio was." "You think you can just take over my book? You need me more than I need you." I turned my laptop around to face her. On screen, new author website, updated, social media bios, and a revised press release about Oprah's selection, all with my proper credit restored. "You went behind my back," she said, voice hollow. "No," I replied. "I took back what's mine." Vanessa stood slowly, that forced grace she wore like designer perfume. But I saw the twitch in her jaw, the stiffness in her shoulders, She wasn't in control anymore, and she felt it. "You're nothing without me," she said. I stood too, picking up my phone and tucking it into my pocket. That's what you can tell yourself if it helps you sleep. I maintained eye contact. I believe the technical term is projection. She turned on her heel and walked out. Didn't slam the door, didn't look back, but for the first time in months, I sat down at my desk and didn't feel like I was borrowing space in my own life. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I just breathed deep and steady. But peace is a funny thing. Sometimes it's just the silence before the next storm. Because Vanessa, she wasn't finished. Not yet. 3 days after I showed her that email and ended our working relationship, my phone rang at 8:17 a.m., just as I was settling into a Wednesday that finally felt like mine again. "Hi, this is Elena from Potomac Literary Review," the voice said. "We just wanted to confirm the interview with Vanessa West about her work developing invisible threads and her upcoming publishing venture." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What interview?" She paused. "The profile piece Vanessa arranged. She said she's launching her own imprint and using your book as her first success story?" My spine stiffened. Elena continued, oblivious. "She mentioned you might be too busy with writing to handle the business side. Great arrangement you two have." I ended the call politely, barely. Then I opened my laptop, and there it was. A website under the name West Literary. Similar font to my publisher's, same color palette as my book cover, and the tagline I'd written in a Somerville coffee shop 3 years ago. Finding threads of connection in a fragmented world. The same mission statement, the same aesthetic, the same vision, word for word. Even the Our Story section had the phrase I'd scribbled on a Post-it note during my second sleepless week of revisions. Invisible doesn't mean insignificant. Vanessa had taken it all, branded it as her own literary venture, but kept everything else intact. Founder and publisher, Vanessa West. No mention of me, except as her first acquired author. I refreshed the page. She was soliciting queries from new writers in 3 genres I had personally discussed exploring in a journal entry she must have read. My throat clenched, not in rage, not in shock, but in disgust. The next blow didn't come from a stranger. It came from someone I trusted. An old writing mentor, one who had guided me through my earliest drafts during the darkest times, emailed that afternoon. "Hi, Naomi. Just confirming Vanessa's note about her taking over your book's publicity entirely for more strategic positioning. If that's your preference, I support it. She mentioned your writing retreat plans." That line, "if that's your preference," cracked something inside me. She hadn't just rebranded herself. She was actively undermining my foundation, and I'd let her get close enough to know every soft spot, every vulnerable angle, every relationship that mattered to me. I sat in silence for a full minute, staring at my screen while the hum of the refrigerator buzzed like white noise. For a moment, I questioned myself. Maybe I had let too much go. Maybe it was my fault for believing family meant safety. No. This was hers. But I had to contain it fast. I called an emergency meeting with my publisher before noon. No email, no text, just me on the phone, voice steady. Conference call 1 hour. Bring legal. Once we connected, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Some of you may have heard Vanessa is launching a publishing imprint," I said. "Let me be clear. This is unauthorized, unethical, and legally actionable." Silence on the line. Then my editor cleared her throat. "We just assumed you were expanding your reach." I nodded, though they couldn't see me. She does not have my blessing. And this isn't just a personal matter. It's intellectual property theft. I emailed them the screenshots as we spoke and underlined one phrase: cease and desist. We established clear next steps. Mira from Riverstone would draft official notices clarifying that West Literary had no connection to me or my work. Their legal team would address the trademark violations. I would issue a statement to my small but dedicated readership. This isn't about revenge, I finished. This is about reclaiming the truth. Then I added, quieter. She may have copied the blueprint, but I still hold the original vision. The line was silent. Then my editor said firmly, "We've got your back, Naomi. No dramatic declarations, no performative outrage. Just quiet solidarity that meant more than any grand gesture." Later that evening, when the apartment had cleared of the day's tension and the air finally stilled, I opened the small wooden box on my nightstand. Tucked inside was a worn library card from when I was 9, the first time I checked out more books than I could carry. Behind it was my first author photo, taken by a friend in natural light beside my cramped writing desk. No makeup, no styling, just me and the nervous hope in my eyes. I pinned it above my desk where Vanessa's professional headshot had once commanded attention. Let them forget. Let them twist. But this faded photograph was proof. I started something from nothing, and that something was mine. And when the first Oprah pre-interview came, she showed up uninvited. I was midway through my talking points, sipping water between answers about my writing process, when someone leaned into the Zoom frame and whispered near my ear, "Your sister just walked into the building." The studio space I'd rented in Cambridge was modest. Exposed brick, natural light, comfortable seating arranged for the virtual interview. My heart rate quickened, but I kept my expression neutral as I asked the producer for a 5-minute break. I stepped into the hallway, and there she was. Vanessa in a tailored navy dress, leather portfolio clutched to her chest, author copies of my book, stacked in her arms. She was speaking rapidly to the building receptionist. "I'm the publisher representative for Naomi West. They're expecting me for the Oprah segment." At first, I expected my pulse to spike. I expected the old sting, but it didn't come. Instead, a cold calm settled into my shoulders. Familiar, final. She wasn't a surprise anymore. She was a consequence, and I was ready. I walked toward her, steps measured and unhurried. "Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying down the corridor. "This is a closed interview." She turned, a practiced smile already in place. "There you are. I brought the media kit and you're talking. Points." The receptionist looked between us, confusion evident. "I don't need talking points," I said evenly. "And Oprah's team has their own media kit." Vanessa lowered her voice, stepping closer. "Don't be ridiculous. You'll freeze without preparation. Remember the bookstore reading?" I didn't move back. Instead, I met her gaze directly. "The one where you called my book Vanity Publishing? I remember perfectly." Her smile flickered, but recovered. "I was just explaining industry realities. You're welcome for getting you this far." I felt something inside me shift, not break, not bend, but solidify. Like concrete finally setting after too long in the rain. "You didn't get me here," I said, each word deliberate. "You tried to take credit for what I built, and now you're trying to insert yourself into an opportunity you didn't create." I gestured to the exit sign. "The interview is starting again. In 3 minutes, you won't be in it." She laughed, short and sharp. "Is this how you treat family, after everything I've done?" "Family doesn't steal from family." The production assistant stepped into the hallway. "Ms. West, we're ready when you are." I turned to go, then paused and looked back at Vanessa. "You can keep the copies of my book. I signed a new printing contract yesterday. These will be collector's items soon. The edition before Oprah." Also, I walked back into the studio without waiting for her response. The interview resumed, and I spoke more freely than I had in months. About the midnight writings when my children were finally asleep. About the rejections that came so regularly, I started using them as bookmarks. about finding strength in vulnerability and voice in silence. When the producer asked about my publishing journey, I told the truth. All of it. The small advance from a passionate independent press. The family member who tried to co-opt my success. The lesson in protecting your work while sharing your heart. Sometimes, I said, looking directly into the camera, the people closest to you can't see who you're becoming because they're too invested in who you've been. The producer nodded. That's going to resonate with a lot of our viewers. After we wrapped, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother. 5 texts from Vanessa. I silenced the notifications and walked to the window, watching the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the parking lot. Vanessa was still there, sitting in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel though the engine wasn't running. Just waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Permission? Acknowledgement? Another chance to explain away what couldn't be justified? I turned. Away from the window. Some vigils aren't worth witnessing. That night, back in my apartment, I didn't pour wine to celebrate. I didn't scroll through congratulatory messages. I brewed a cup of tea, turned my phone to Do Not Disturb, and opened a fresh document on my laptop. I stared at the blank page for a few seconds, then typed a single line. The second book begins where the first one ends. I wasn't writing about Vanessa. I wasn't writing about betrayal. I was writing past it, through it, beyond it, to where new stories waited. The cursor blinked, patient and promising. But what surprised me most was the silence that followed. No more passive-aggressive texts from my mother asking if I could just find a role for Vanessa. No more carefully orchestrated family gatherings, where my writing was framed as a cute hobby while Vanessa's publicist work was treated like brain surgery. No more "we should talk" messages from Vanessa with thinly veiled attempts to reassert her narrative. For the first time in years, my phone didn't buzz with obligation, and strangely, the quiet didn't ache. It settled like a soft quilt pulled over old bruises, not hiding them but cushioning their tenderness. There were moments in the early mornings before the sun illuminated my writing desk when I would glance at my notifications, half expecting some new manipulation, another undermining comment disguised as concern. But the inbox stayed remarkably uncluttered. My mother had only texted once since the confrontation, a terse, "Call me when you're being reasonable." Vanessa had gone completely silent on social media. No LinkedIn updates claiming credit for literary discoveries, no Instagram stories about her author. Nothing. Just space. It was the first time in my adult life that silence felt like progress, and not punishment. The week of my Oprah book club announcement came. No congratulatory call from family, not even a generic good luck text from cousins. I'd already adjusted my expectations. My writing group brought champagne to our regular Thursday meeting, and a few neighbors left handwritten cards at my door. We celebrated in my small living room, mismatched glasses raised to dreams that refused to die quietly. We laughed about the early days when I wrote on my phone while waiting for my son's soccer practice to end. We toasted to the rejections that shaped the book into something stronger. It was the smallest victory party I could have imagined. And yet, it was the first time I didn't feel like I was borrowing someone else's moment. I wasn't a placeholder anymore. I belonged in the center of this story. 2 weeks later, my editor brought a gift after our strategy call for the paperback release. It was a framed mock-up of the new cover, now featuring the Oprah's book club seal. Bold letters, embossed. Title, Invisible Threads. Underneath, she'd added a handwritten note. For the woman who weaves reality from dreams. I smiled genuinely, and my chest swelled with something that wasn't quite pride, something steadier. That afternoon, I went into my home office, unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, and pulled out the same worn page I'd kept folded in a plastic sleeve for years. The first page of my manuscript with my editor's initial notes. It was coffee-stained, red-lined, marked with questions that had once seemed insurmountable. The margins contained one comment I'd traced with my fingertip countless times. This voice needs to be heard. I framed it alongside the new cover, not as a trophy, as a journey map. I didn't erase Vanessa from the story, but I didn't center her either. Some chapters close naturally, and that's enough. One rainy Tuesday, a strange email appeared in my inbox. No signature, no greeting, just a subject line. You deserve the credit. I hesitated, then clicked. Attached was a string of forwarded emails. Vanessa had pitched her publishing expertise to a major literary agency in New York, claiming she had discovered and developed my voice, even recycling passages from my acknowledgments as her personal philosophy. But it hadn't worked. At the bottom of the chain was the agent's courteous but firm reply. We're familiar with Naomi West's work and journey. While we appreciate your interest, we must decline your proposal. That was it. No dramatic confrontation, no public calling out, just a quiet acknowledgement. But I sat in front of the screen for a long time, reading those words repeatedly. They hadn't needed me to defend myself to recognize the truth. They'd already seen. And that was a kind of justice I hadn't anticipated. One evening, about 5 weeks after the Oprah announcement, I sat on my small balcony with a mug of chamomile and the sound of rain pattering against the fire escape. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders. It was still chilly for April, but the quiet didn't press anymore. It invited. I thought about the years I spent carrying the burden of others' expectations like it was some sacred duty, as if love and loyalty required constant self-diminishment, as if staying small could somehow make family bonds stronger. But now I knew you can't shrink yourself enough to make someone secure who is determined to see you as competition. You can only build stronger boundaries and a clearer voice. I didn't burn the bridges, but I didn't leave signposts pointing backward either. That night, I opened my notebook one last time. On a fresh, uncreased page, I wrote, "The email from Oprah. That was her undoing. But becoming visible? That's mine." The next morning, as dawn broke over Boston, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway, my voice still morning rough. "Naomi West? This is Michael from the Today Show. We'd like to book you for an author segment next Thursday." I smiled, reaching for my planner. "I'd be happy to join you." "Wonderful. And should we include your sister?" "Your publisher mentioned she's been involved with the book." I paused, just for a breath. "No," I said simply. "Just me. I'm the author." "Got it," he replied. "Just checking. Just me, just the author, just enough." And for the first time, since I could remember, that felt like everything. The Oprah effect was immediate and overwhelming. By Thursday morning, my book had climbed to number 3 on the Amazon bestseller list. My social media followers quadrupled overnight. My inbox overflowed with interview requests, speaking engagements, and book club invitations. The quiet life I'd carefully constructed, writing in pre-dawn hours, balancing single motherhood with creative ambition, measuring success in small personal victories, had suddenly become very, very loud. But there was a strange comfort in the chaos. These demands were mine to navigate, mine to accept or decline. The success belonged wholly to me, and for the first time, no one was standing in the wings, ready to take credit for my spotlight. My publisher assigned a dedicated publicity team. Oprah level requires Oprah resources, my editor explained during our strategy call. The new team was efficient, professional, and most importantly, they addressed me as Ms. West in every email. No diminishment, no repositioning, just the straightforward respect I'd been quietly fighting for. 3 weeks after the Oprah announcement, I was scheduled for my first major television appearance, a 7-minute segment on Good Morning America. The night before, I sat cross-legged on my bed, index cards spread across the duvet, practicing talking points while my children slept down the hall. My phone buzzed, unknown number, I hesitated, then answered. Is this Naomi West, the author? A woman's voice asked. Yes, this is she. This is Claudia Mitchell from Vanessa West Literary. I'm calling to coordinate tomorrow's GMA appearance. Vanessa wanted me to check if you'd like her to meet you at the studio or travel together from your apartment. The blood in my veins went cold, then hot. I took a slow breath. There must be a misunderstanding, I said, my voice remarkably steady. I don't work with Vanessa West, and there is no legitimate agency by that name. Silence on the line. Then, oh, she said, I was told you were her primary client. I'm represented exclusively by Riverstone Press and their assigned publicity team, I said. May I ask how you came to work with Ms. West? She recruited me from my internship at Horizon Publishing last month. Said she was expanding her literary agency and needed an assistant for her growing client list. The woman's voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. She showed me your book as her success story. My heart constricted, not for myself this time, but for this young woman being manipulated at the start of her career. Claudia, I said gently, I'm afraid you've been misled. Vanessa has no agency, no clients, and no affiliation with my work or my publisher. I'd be happy to connect you with some legitimate contacts in the industry if you're looking for opportunities. Another long silence. I've been working without pay for a trial period. She promised commission after your television spots started airing. I closed my eyes briefly. I'm so sorry. Would you be willing to forward me any communications you've had about this arrangement? My legal team would be very interested. By morning, I had 5 emails from Claudia containing everything from a fabricated agency agreement to promotional materials for West Literary's breakthrough memoir success. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my narrative, she was building an entire fictional business on the foundation of my work, recruiting unsuspecting young professionals into her scheme. I forwarded everything to my publisher's legal department with a simple note. This needs to end. Today. My GMA appearance went smoothly. I spoke about the universal themes in my memoir: resilience, identity, the search for authenticity in a world that rewards performance. The host asked about my journey to publication. It wasn't easy, I said, smiling. There were 112 rejections before the yes. But I kept writing because I believed someone needed to read what I had to say. And now Oprah agrees, the host replied warmly. Dreams don't have expiration dates, I said. Sometimes they just need stubborn keepers. Back in my hotel room, afterward, I found 17 missed calls from Vanessa, 3 from my mother, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to the voicemail from the unknown caller first. Ms. West, this is Trevor Hamilton from Penguin Random House. I'd like to discuss a potential 2-book deal. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in suddenly trembling hands. Penguin Random House, the big leagues, the dream I'd barely allowed myself to acknowledge. Before I could process this, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. How dare you threaten legal action against me? After everything I've done for your career? Mom is devastated by your betrayal. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my editor at Riverstone. Janet, I just got a call from Penguin, but I want to talk to you first. You took a chance on me when no one else would. That's how publishing works, Janet said, her voice warm despite the static. We find the gems. The big houses notice after they shine. You should take the meeting. Just remember who believed in you first. I won't forget, I promised. That afternoon, I met with Trevor from Penguin in a sleek midtown conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Bryant Park. He was younger than I expected, with intelligent eyes and an easy manner that made the intimidating setting feel almost comfortable. We've been watching your trajectory with interest, he said, sliding a folder across the polished table. Your voice is exactly what we're looking for in our contemporary memoir list. Inside was a contract outlining a 2-book deal with a 19-day advance that made my breath catch, enough to pay off my mortgage, fund my children's education, and write full-time for the foreseeable future. The second book, Trevor continued. We're particularly excited about the concept you mentioned in your Oprah interview, exploring how women reclaim their narratives after systematic erasure. I looked up sharply. I haven't developed that concept publicly yet. He frowned slightly. We received a proposal from your agent, Vanessa West. The room seemed to tilt. She's not my agent. She has no authority to submit anything on my behalf. Trevor's expression shifted from confusion to concern. She sent us a 70-page proposal with sample chapters 2 days ago, said you were eager to move to a larger house. I reached for the glass of water in front of me, took a slow sip to steady myself. May I see what she sent? He hesitated, then pulled out his tablet and navigated to an email. I should probably speak to legal first, but under the circumstances. He turned the screen toward me. There it was, a professional-looking document with my name, my photo, and chapters I had never written. The voice was similar to mine, but not quite right, like hearing yourself on a recording and not recognizing the sound. The proposal explored themes from my private journals, ideas I'd been developing for years but had never shared publicly. This isn't mine, I said quietly, but the concepts are from my personal notes that were in my home office. Trevor's face darkened. I'll need to report this to our legal department immediately. Literary fraud is serious. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. I'd still like to discuss a legitimate deal with Penguin. But first, I need to address this situation. Of course, he said, closing his tablet. When you're ready, the offer stands. Your authentic voice is what interests us, Ms. West, not an imitation. Back at my hotel, I called my publishers, legal team, and explained the situation. Their response was immediate and unequivocal. This crosses from unethical into potentially criminal, the lead counsel said. Identity theft, fraud, misrepresentation to a major publisher. We need to shut this down completely. I agreed, my resolve hardening. Do whatever is necessary. That evening, as I packed for my flight home, my phone rang again. My mother's number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed closure. Hello, Mom. What have you done? Her voice was sharp, accusatory. Vanessa is devastated. She says you're trying to destroy her career with false allegations. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly bone-tired. What career, Mom? The one she fabricated by stealing my work? The fake literary agency she created using my success? She helped you. My mother's voice rose. You were nobody before she stepped in. Just a single mom with a hobby. She made you professional. The words hit like physical blows, but I remained steady. I was a published author before she stepped in. I built my career word by word, rejection by rejection. She didn't make me professional. She tried to make me invisible. You've always been jealous of her connections, my mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. Her natural talent for business. Her business is fiction, Mom, and not the legitimate kind. She submitted a fraudulent proposal to Penguin under my name. She hired an assistant who thought she was working for a real agency. This isn't about sibling rivalry. It's about law. Silence stretched between us, taut and brittle. You need to fix this, she finally said. Family comes first. I agree, I replied quietly. That's why I can't let her continue down this path. Real family doesn't exploit each other. Real family doesn't steal. I don't recognize you anymore, my mother whispered. That's the problem, Mom. You never really saw me to begin with. I ended the call and stared at the darkening skyline beyond my window. The city lights blinked on one by one, steady and determined, illuminating the gathering night. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more opportunities, more battles perhaps. But tonight, in this quiet moment of reckoning, I recognized something fundamental had shifted within me. The need for external validation, from family, from peers, from the world, had loosened its grip on my heart. The next morning, my phone chimed with a text as I waited for my flight at Logan Airport. Cease and desist delivered to Vanessa West. All fraudulent online presence for West Literary has been removed. Penguin Random House has been fully briefed. Would you like to proceed with further legal action? I thought for a long moment, watching travelers rush past, each carrying their own invisible burdens. No, I typed back. The removal of the fraudulent content is sufficient. I don't want to pursue charges unless she attempts this again. Some might call it mercy. Others might call it weakness. I called it freedom. The freedom to move forward unburdened by rage or retribution. My flight was called. As I stood to board, my phone buzzed with an email notification. From Vanessa. Subject: I'm sorry. I stared at it, finger hovering over the delete button. Then, with a deep breath, I opened it. Naomi, I've received the legal notice. I'm shutting everything down. You win. I just want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. What started as helping with your book became something else. I watched you succeed where I had always failed, and something in me broke. It's not an excuse, just the ugly truth. I'm moving to Chicago next week. I won't contact you again. No justifications, no blame, just a simple, stark acknowledgement. I didn't respond. Some conversations have no productive next chapter. As the plane lifted into the clouds, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not about betrayal or vindication, but about the journey ahead. The words flowed with a new clarity, unburdened by the need to prove anything to anyone. By the time we landed, I had outlined the first 3 chapters of my second book, my real second book. It wasn't about Vanessa or family dysfunction. It was about women finding their authentic voices after years of being silenced, overlooked, or underestimated. It was about the universal journey toward self-reclamation. The Oprah interview aired the following Tuesday. I watched it alone in my living room, a strange experience of seeing myself speak truths I'd held silent for so long. What gave you the courage to write so honestly? Oprah asked, leaning forward with that famous intensity. On screen, I smiled. I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting me, it was erasing me. And we only get one life to be fully seen. My phone began lighting up immediately, friends, fellow writers, readers connecting with the message. But the notification that stopped me cold was from my agent. Your segment just crashed Oprah's book club site. Invisible Threads is officially the fastest-selling selection in 3 years. I sat back against my couch, a laugh bubbling up, from somewhere deep and genuine. Not from pride or vindication, but from the sheer wonder of it all. The quiet voice that had whispered stories into the darkness while my children slept had somehow reached across the void to touch countless others who felt unseen. That voice had always been mine. It had never needed validation or permission, only courage. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. A delivery person stood on my porch with a massive arrangement of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. Naomi West, these are for you. The card read simply, to authentic voices and new beginnings. Your friends at Penguin Random House. I placed them on my writing desk, their fragrance filling the small space with possibility. My publisher called the next morning. We need to talk about the paperback release. The hardcover is in its 7th printing, and we're struggling to keep up with demand. That's a good problem to have, I laughed. The best kind, Janet agreed. But there's something else. Riverstone is being courted by several larger houses for acquisition. Your success has put us on the map in a significant way. My heart skipped. Would that affect our existing contracts? Only positively. We'd have more resources, wider distribution, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. You're the reason this is happening, Naomi. You believed in your book when no one else did, and you fought for it when others tried to claim it. That kind of integrity matters in this business. After we hung up, I walked to my bookshelf and ran my fingers along the spine of my author copy. Invisible Threads by Naomi West. My name, my words, my truth. I remembered the countless mornings. I'd risen at 4:30 a.m. to write before my children woke. The lunch breaks spent scribbling in notebooks. The rejections that came so regularly I could predict their wording from the first line. I remembered the moment I'd almost given up, when the weight of single parenthood and financial pressure and creative doubt had nearly crushed my resolve. What had kept me going wasn't the dream of success or acclaim. It was the simple, stubborn belief that I had something worth saying and that someday someone might need to hear it. Now, thousands of someones were hearing it. Not because my sister had made me professional, but because I had refused to let my voice be silenced or stolen. My children burst through the front door, backpacks slung over small shoulders, voices overlapping with stories from their school day. I closed my laptop and turned to them, fully present for their excited chatter about science projects and playground politics. Later, after homework and dinner and bedtime stories, I returned to my desk. A message waited from a reader in Australia. Your book found me when I needed it most. After years of letting others define my worth, I'm finally writing my own story. Thank you for showing me it's possible. I printed her message and pinned it above my desk, next to my original author photo. Not as validation, but as a reminder of why the struggle mattered. The following week brought a surprise invitation. A prestigious literary festival wanted me to deliver a keynote address on authenticity in the age of personal branding. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I prepared my speech, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The betrayal that had once consumed my thoughts had become simply a chapter in a much larger story, not the defining moment I had feared it would be. On the morning of the festival, I stood backstage, pulse quickening as the introduction began. The audience was larger than I'd anticipated, faces disappearing into the darkened auditorium beyond the first few rows. And now, please welcome the author of the Oprah Book Club selection and national bestseller Invisible Threads, Naomi West. The applause washed over me as I walked to the podium, notes clutched perhaps too tightly in my hand. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces and set my prepared remarks aside. I'd planned to talk about authenticity as a theoretical concept, I began. But instead, I want to tell you about the day I almost lost mine. For the next 30 minutes, I spoke without notes about the insidious ways we surrender our narratives to others, sometimes willingly, sometimes through coercion, sometimes through the simple human desire to be accepted and approved. The most dangerous erasure, I said toward the end, isn't when others try to claim our story. It's when we begin to believe we don't deserve to be its protagonist. The silence in the hall was complete, hundreds of people leaning forward slightly, collectively holding their breath. Your voice matters, I continued, my own voice strengthening. Not because it's loud or polished or marketable. It matters because it's yours. And in a world determined to template our experiences into predictable narratives, the most revolutionary act is to tell your story on your own terms. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for me, I realized. It was for every person in that room who had ever felt silenced, sidelined, or secondary in their own life. As I signed books afterward, a young woman with anxious eyes waited until the line had dwindled before approaching my table. I worked for your sister, she said, quietly. As an unpaid editorial assistant at her fake agency, I just wanted you to know that your speech today gave me the courage to report what happened instead of blaming myself for being fooled. I reached for her hand. It wasn't your fault. Con artists succeed because they're convincing, not because Their victims are foolish. She nodded, blinking back tears. I'm studying publishing at Emerson. Would it be okay? I mean, would you maybe consider letting me interview you for my thesis? About integrity in the industry? I smiled and handed her my card. I'd be honored. And if you're looking for a legitimate internship, I know some people at Riverstone who value both talent and ethics. That night in my hotel room, I received an unexpected email from my cousin Matt, the only family member who had reached out since the confrontation with Vanessa. Saw your keynote online. You were magnificent. Mom told me what happened with Vanessa, and I just wanted you to know not everyone in the family is blind. Some of us always saw you, Nye. Your voice was always the real thing. I sat with his words. For a long moment, a bittersweet ache expanding in my chest. Perhaps family wasn't entirely lost, just reconfigured into something new and more authentic. The tour continued, 12 cities in 14 days, each venue larger than the last. In Chicago, a woman waited 2 hours to tell me she'd left an abusive relationship after reading my chapter on recognizing manipulation. In Seattle, a man in his 70s said my book had given him the courage to finally write his own memoir after decades of silence. In Atlanta, a teenage girl clutched my book to her chest and whispered, "You made me feel seen." These moments sustained me through the exhaustion, the homesickness, the strange disorientation of hotel rooms that all looked the same at 3 a.m., when jet lag kept me staring at unfamiliar ceilings. In each city, I checked the local bookstores for any sign of Vanessa's presence or interference. There was nothing. She had disappeared as completely as if she'd never existed in my professional life. The cease and desist had worked, or perhaps the humiliation of being exposed had finally silenced her. On the final night of the tour, I returned to my hotel room to find a message from Trevor at Penguin. Contract is ready when you are. The team is excited about your authentic second book. No ghostwriting needed. Your voice is exactly what we want. I smiled at his gentle dig at Vanessa's fraudulent proposal. Tomorrow I would sign with Penguin. Tonight, I would call my children and listen to their day, grounding myself in the reality that mattered most. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. Publishing industry scandal. Fake literary agent exposed in multiple fraud cases. I clicked through, heart racing. The article detailed how Vanessa had attempted the same scheme with 3 other emerging authors, creating elaborate fake businesses to profit from their work. One had lost a significant opportunity with a major publisher because of her interference. The piece mentioned me only briefly as a best-selling author who was an early target of the scheme but took legal action. I sat on the edge of the bed, emotions churning. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a profound sadness that she had continued her deception, hurting others as she had hurt me. The article concluded by noting she was under investigation for fraud and identity theft. I didn't call her. I didn't reach out to my mother. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote a private message to the authors named in the article, offering support, legal contacts, and solidarity. Their responses came quickly, grateful, angry, determined to reclaim their work. By morning, we had created an informal alliance, sharing resources and strategies to protect our intellectual property and professional reputations. What had begun as an isolated betrayal had transformed into a movement for creative justice. My final interview of the tour was with a respected literary podcast. The host asked thoughtful questions about craft and process until the very end, when she veered into unexpected territory. Your sister has been in the news recently, accused of defrauding several authors. Given your own experience, what would you say to creative people who find their work or identity co-opted by others? I paused, considering my words carefully. I would tell them that thieves only steal what has value. If someone tried to claim your work, it's because that work has power. Don't let the violation silence you. Let it confirm that your voice matters enough for someone to want to claim it as their own. The host nodded appreciatively. And what about forgiveness? Is that part of your journey? I looked out the window at the city skyline, buildings reaching determinedly toward the clouds. Forgiveness isn't an event. It's a process, I said. Finally. I'm not interested in the kind of forgiveness that enables further harm, but I am working toward the kind that frees me from carrying anger as my constant companion. Not for her sake, but for mine. As the interview concluded, I felt a weight lift. Not completely, but noticeably. The narrative was mine again. Not because I had won some dramatic showdown, but because I had simply refused to surrender my story to someone else's version of events. That evening, I boarded my final flight home, exhausted but fulfilled in a way I had never experienced before. The woman beside me was reading my book, completely unaware that its author sat next to her. I watched her underline passages, add small exclamation points in the margins, fold down page corners to return to later. My words, reaching across the space between strangers, creating connection where none had existed before. There was a magic in that I hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. As the plane descended toward Boston, lights twinkling below like earthbound stars, I thought about the journey ahead. The Penguin contract. The second book, written entirely on my own terms. The community of authentic voices I had found through this painful but transformative experience. Vanessa had called my work Vanity Publishing that night at the bookstore, attempting to diminish what she couldn't control. But there was nothing vain about speaking truth, about refusing erasure, about standing firmly in your own narrative. The real vanity was believing you could claim someone else's voice as your own and not eventually be exposed as a fraud. My car was waiting at the terminal. As the driver loaded my luggage, I checked my phone one last time. A text from my agent. Oprah wants to feature you in her magazine's Women Who Reclaimed Their Power issue. Exclusive interview and photo shoot. You in? I smiled and typed back, absolutely. My voice, my story, my truth. As we pulled away from the airport, Boston's familiar skyline welcomed me home. Not to the life I had before. That was gone. Forever. But to something stronger, clearer, and unquestionably mine. 6 months after the Oprah announcement, I stood in the wings of the National Book Foundation Gala, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my midnight blue gown. The weight of the moment pressed against my chest, not uncomfortable, just undeniable. Like standing at the edge of a high dive, knowing the only way forward was through air. 5 minutes, Ms. West, the stage manager whispered, clipboard clutched to her chest. I nodded, suddenly grateful for the dim lighting that concealed my trembling hands. Tonight wasn't just another event in the whirlwind that had become my life. Tonight was the culmination of a journey I'd never dared to imagine. From pre-dawn writing sessions at my kitchen table to this glittering ballroom filled with literary luminaries. Invisible Threads had been nominated for a National Book Award. My little memoir, born of stolen moments and stubborn hope, now stood alongside works from established literary giants. The imposter syndrome that had shadowed me for months whispered that I didn't belong here, that any moment someone would discover I was just a single mother who'd gotten lucky. But beneath that familiar doubt ran a stronger current of certainty. This wasn't luck. This was the result of years of work, of voice-finding form, of refusing to be silenced or sidelined. Whatever happened tonight, I had earned my place on that stage. My phone vibrated in my clutch. A text from Sophie, my 13-year-old daughter. Watching the live stream with Ethan. You look beautiful, Mom. You've got this. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. My children, who had sacrificed countless hours of my attention so I could write, were witnessing this moment. Whatever else Vanessa had taken from me, she couldn't touch this. And now, the host's Voice boomed through the speakers. Our final nominee in the autobiography category, Naomi West for Invisible Threads. The spotlight found me as I stepped onto the stage, momentarily blinding. I blinked, focusing on the podium's solid wood beneath my palms. "Thank you," I began, voice steadier than I felt. When I started writing Invisible Threads, I was writing for an audience of one, myself. There were no dreams of stages like this, no visions of awards or recognition. Just the desperate need to make sense of my own experience, to find meaning in struggle, to transform pain into purpose. The room quieted. Hundreds of faces turned toward me in attentive silence. What I discovered was that the most personal stories are often the most universal. That when we speak our truth with unflinching honesty, we create space for others to recognize their own experiences in our words. We build bridges across the chasms of our isolation. I paused, eyes scanning. The crowd, landing briefly on Trevor from Penguin in the third row. He gave me an encouraging nod. This nomination isn't just validation for me as a writer. It's validation for every person who has ever felt erased, overlooked, or underestimated. For every voice that has been told it's too quiet, too raw, too much, or not enough. Your stories matter. Your truth matters. And no one has the right to claim your narrative as their own. The applause was generous, genuine. As I returned to my seat, a woman squeezed my arm and whispered, "I needed to hear that." Later that evening, after the winner had been announced, not me, but I'd never expected to win, I stood at the reception with a flute of champagne, fielding congratulations and discussing my upcoming book tour. The second printing of Invisible Threads had sold out in 3 weeks. The paperback rights had been acquired in a heated auction. International translations were underway in 12 languages. Success tasted sweeter than I'd imagined, not because of the accolades or sales figures, but because it was unequivocally mine. Every interview, every book signing, every reader email reinforced what Vanessa had tried so desperately to undermine. This was my voice, my story, my achievement. A tall woman in a structured black dress approached, hand extended. "Naomi West, I'm Elizabeth Chen from Voices Amplified Foundation. Do you have a moment?" We found a quieter corner near a display of literary classics. Elizabeth explained that her organization provided grants and mentorship to underrepresented writers, particularly those who had faced significant obstacles to publication. "We're launching a new initiative," she said, eyes bright with purpose. "Supporting writers who have experienced intellectual property theft or creative exploitation. Your story, both in your memoir and your public stance against your sisters' actions, has inspired many who've suffered similar violations." I took a sip of champagne, allowing her words to settle. "How can I help?" "We'd like you to headline our spring symposium on creative integrity and intellectual ownership. And, if you're willing, to serve as a mentor for writers rebuilding their confidence after having their work appropriated." The request touched something deep in my core, the desire to transform my painful experience into something constructive, to extend a hand to others still struggling in the shadows I had emerged from. "I'd be honored," I said, "on one condition." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "That we create a specific program for young publishing professionals like Claudia, the assistant my sister manipulated. There are vulnerable people at every level of this industry who need protection and guidance." Elizabeth's smile widened. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Can I set up a proper meeting next week?" As she walked away, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Trevor, champagne glass in hand. "Congratulations on the nomination," he said warmly. "Though between us, you were robbed." I laughed. "The winner's book was extraordinary. I'm just honored to be in such company." "Speaking of extraordinary," Trevor continued, "the early manuscript pages for your new book are causing quite a stir at Penguin. The editorial board is unanimously enthusiastic. Pride bloomed in my chest. My second book, Reclamation, was unfolding with a confidence I hadn't possessed during the writing of Invisible Threads. It explored women's journeys toward self-sovereignty across cultures and contexts, weaving research with personal narratives, including my own. "I'm glad to hear it," I said. "It feels different this time. Stronger somehow." "That's because you are," Trevor replied simply. "By the way, have you given any thought to the TED Talk invitation? Their Voices of Courage series is perfectly aligned with your message." I nodded. "I'm drafting the outline now. It's challenging to distill everything into 18 minutes, but I think I've found the thread." As the evening wound down, I checked my phone to find several missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemails, no texts. I dismissed it as a persistent spam caller and hailed a taxi back to my hotel. The following morning, I woke to an email that made my blood run cold. Subject: "Your sister needs help." From Ellen West Mom. After 6 months of silence, she had finally reached out. Not to congratulate me on the nomination or acknowledge her role in Vanessa's deception, but to pull me back into the drama I'd finally escaped. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Naomi, I know you probably hate us both right now, but Vanessa is in trouble. The fraud investigation has escalated. She's facing potential criminal charges. She tried to harm herself last night. She's in Boston Medical Center. She's asking for you." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Whatever anger I harbored toward my sister, whatever boundaries I'd established to protect myself, the thought of her in such despair shook me to my core. I canceled my morning interviews and booked the first flight to Boston. The hospital corridor stretched before me, antiseptic and unforgiving under fluorescent lights. I found her room easily. No flowers, no cards, just the sterile efficiency of emergency medical care. My mother sat beside the bed, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Vanessa lay with her eyes closed, an IV drip feeding into her arm, her complexion ashen against the white pillowcase. My mother looked up as I entered, surprise and relief washing over her face. "You came." "Of course I came," I said quietly, setting my bag on a chair. "What happened?" "They found prescription pills," she whispered. Her roommate called 911. "The doctors say she'll recover physically, but—" She trailed off, gesturing helplessly at my sister's still form. I moved to the opposite side of the bed, studying Vanessa's face. The sharp confidence that had always animated her features was gone, replaced by a vulnerable softness I hadn't seen since we were children. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on my face. Recognition dawned, followed by a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. Shame? Relief? Fear? "You're here," she murmured, voice raspy. "I'm here," I confirmed, neither warm nor cold, simply present. "Why?" The question hung between us, loaded with the weight of everything that had transpired. I considered my answer carefully. Because whatever happened between us doesn't erase 35 years of shared history. Because suffering isn't justice. Because I needed to see for myself that you're still here. Tears welled in her eyes. "I've lost everything. My reputation, my prospects. The fraud investigation, they're talking about criminal charges." She swallowed hard. I didn't think about the consequences. It just spiraled, and then I couldn't stop. "I know about spiraling," I said, thinking of the dark years after my divorce, the desperate scramble to provide for my children while holding on to my creative ambitions. "But this isn't the end of your story, Vanessa. Just a difficult chapter." My mother stared at me as if I'd sprouted wings. "After everything she did, you're being kind to her?" I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not here to punish or absolve. I'm here because it's the right thing to do. And because I refuse to let this situation define either of us." The conversation that followed was difficult, halting, raw, with unprocessed emotion. Vanessa admitted to feelings she'd harbored for years: jealousy of my resilience, resentment of my quiet determination, fear that I would succeed where she had repeatedly failed. Not justifications, but context for actions that had seemed purely malicious. "I watched you build something from nothing," she said, tears streaming now. "You just kept going, rejection after rejection. I've never had that kind of persistence. When I saw your book gaining traction, something broke in me. I wanted to be part of a success story so badly that I convinced myself I deserved credit. I didn't offer easy forgiveness. Some breaches of trust can't be repaired with words alone. But I did offer something perhaps more valuable: a path forward. The investigators have contacted me several times," I said. "I've declined to press charges, but I can't stop the legal process entirely. What I can do is provide a statement about your current state and willingness to make amends." Hope flickered across her face. "You would do that? After everything?" "On one condition," I said firmly. "You get professional help, real therapy, not just crisis intervention, and you make restitution to the people you hurt. Claudia, the other writers you approached, everyone." She nodded, almost desperately. "Anything. I'll do anything." I stood, gathering my bag. "I have a flight back to New York in 3 hours. I'll have my lawyer contact the investigators tomorrow." My mother followed me into the hallway, her expression unreadable. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "How can you help her after what she did?" I sighed, the weight of unresolved family dynamics pressing against my shoulders. "Mom, this isn't about forgiveness or forgetting. It's about choosing what kind of person I want to be. Vanessa's actions nearly destroyed me professionally, but I refuse to let them destroy me personally. I won't become bitter or vengeful, even when it might be justified." "You've changed," she said, not quite accusatory, but not entirely approving either. "I've grown," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." As I walked toward the elevator, my mother called after me. "Your book," she said hesitantly. "I finally read it. It's beautiful, Naomi. I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." I nodded, a knot forming in my throat. "Thank you for telling me." Back in New York, I threw myself into preparations for the Voices Amplified Symposium. What had begun as a speaking engagement evolved into something more significant: a comprehensive program addressing intellectual property protection, creative boundaries, and the particular vulnerabilities of writers from marginalized communities. Working with Elizabeth Chen proved invigorating. Her strategic mind complemented my experiential knowledge, and together we built something neither of us could have created alone. We secured legal experts to provide pro bono consultations, established a support network for writers who had experienced theft or exploitation, and developed a mentorship program pairing established authors with emerging voices. The work became a form of healing I hadn't known I needed. Each writer who shared their story of having their work appropriated or dismissed helped me process my own experience. Each time I offered guidance or resources, I reclaimed a piece of the agency Vanessa had tried to strip from me. One afternoon, as Elizabeth and I finalized the symposium schedule in a sunlit conference room, she looked up from her laptop with a thoughtful expression. "You know, most people in your position would have leveraged their story for personal gain and moved on," she observed. "Few would dedicate themselves to systemic change like this." I considered her words. When something painful happens, you have choices. You can let it define you, let it destroy you, or let it strengthen you. I smiled slightly. "I'm choosing the third option." "Well, it's inspiring," Elizabeth said, returning to her notes. "And it's changing lives. 3 of the writers in our pilot program have secured publishing deals, and Claudia just accepted a legitimate assistant position at HarperCollins. Pride warmed my chest. That's what matters: turning wounds into wisdom, not just for ourselves, but for others. As the symposium date approached, my schedule became increasingly hectic. Between promoting the paperback release of Invisible Threads, finishing my second book for Penguin, and preparing my TED Talk, I barely had time to breathe. But each commitment felt purposeful, each challenge an affirmation of how far I'd come. The night before the symposium, I received an unexpected text from my cousin Matt. "Just saw the promo for tomorrow's event. Proud of you, Nye. Mom told me about Vanessa. She's in an intensive outpatient program now. Seems to be taking responsibility finally. Thought you should know." I sat on my hotel bed, phone in hand, a complex emotion washing over me. Not quite relief, not quite vindication, but something adjacent to peace. Vanessa's journey wasn't mine to manage or monitor, but knowing she was getting help lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The symposium exceeded all expectations. Over 300 writers, editors, agents, and publishing professionals filled the auditorium, their collective energy electric with purpose. My keynote address, "Reclaiming Your Narrative from Erasure to Empowerment," drew a standing ovation. But the true magic happened in the breakout sessions and panel discussions that followed. Writers who had been silenced found their voices. Industry professionals committed to more equitable practices. Legal experts offered practical strategies for protecting creative work. During the closing reception, a young woman with vibrant blue hair and determined eyes approached me. Copy of Invisible Threads clutched to her chest. "Your book saved me," she said without preamble. "I was ready to give up writing after my professor took credit for my research. But your story showed me that fighting back isn't just possible, it's necessary." I signed her book with hands that no longer trembled, writing, "Your voice matters. Guard it fiercely. Share it generously." Later that night, as I packed for my early flight, my phone rang. Unknown number, but something prompted me to answer. Naomi West speaking. "Ms. West, this is Alicia Raymond from the Pulitzer Prize Board." My heart stuttered. "Yes? I'm calling to inform you that Invisible Threads has been selected as a finalist in the biography or autobiography category for this year's Pulitzer Prize." The room seemed to tilt again, but differently than before, not with anxiety or dread, but with the vertiginous sensation of dreams manifesting in real time. Thank you," I managed. "That's unexpected." "The committee was particularly moved by your exploration of identity and erasure," Alicia continued. "The formal announcement will be made next Tuesday. Congratulations." After we hung up, I sat motionless on the edge of the bed, phone still clutched in my hand. A Pulitzer finalist. The little book that began in pre-dawn hours at my kitchen table, the story Vanessa had dismissed as Vanity publishing, was now being considered for one of literature's highest honors. I didn't call anyone, didn't post on social media. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to write, not about accolades or vindication, but about the strange, winding path that leads from invisibility to recognition. About the courage required to keep creating when the world tells you your voice doesn't matter. About the power of refusing to be erased. Words flowed with unusual clarity, filling the screen as night deepened outside my window. This would become the conclusion of reclamation, I realized. Not triumph over adversity in the simplistic sense, but the complex, ongoing process of claiming space for your authentic self in a world that often prefers convenient fictions. The TED Talk came 2 weeks later. Standing on the iconic red circle, spotlight trained on my face, I felt strangely calm. The journey from that first bookstore reading, where Vanessa had called my work Vanity Publishing, to this global platform seemed impossible. Yet here I was. "We all have a story," I began, voice strong and clear. "But not all of us have the right to tell it. Sometimes our narratives are hijacked by those with more power, more visibility, more confidence in their right to claim the center of any stage. For the next 18 minutes, I wove together research, personal experience, and the stories of others who had reclaimed their narratives after erasure or appropriation. I spoke about the subtle ways women, particularly, are taught to minimize their achievements and amplify their gratitude to others, often to the point of relinquishing ownership of their own accomplishments. The most radical act, I concluded, isn't fighting those who try to claim your story. It's continuing to tell it anyway, clearly, honestly, in your own voice. It's recognizing that your truth doesn't require external validation to be legitimate. And it's understanding that while others may try to co-opt your narrative, they can never truly own what they didn't create. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. As I exited the stage, the host whispered, "That's going to go viral." She was right. Within 24 hours, the talk had over 2 million views. My social media exploded with messages from people sharing their own experiences of having their work or ideas appropriated. Publishers Weekly ran a feature on intellectual property rights in creative industries. 3 universities requested permission to include my talk in their publishing ethics curricula, but the response that mattered most came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the TED Talk went live, a small package arrived at my apartment. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a first edition of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and a handwritten note. "Naomi, I watched your talk. You've found your voice in a way I never managed to find mine. I've been working with my therapist to understand why I tried to steal what I should have simply admired. The road back to integrity is longer than I imagined, but I'm committed to walking it. I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that your words reached me too. I placed the book on my shelf, not hidden but not prominently displayed either. A complex artifact from a painful chapter, now integrated into the larger story of my life. The Pulitzer announcement came on a Tuesday in April, sunny and unexpectedly warm. I was in my writing studio. A small, bright space I'd rented after the success of Invisible Threads allowed me to stop writing at my kitchen table. My agent called the moment the news broke. "Naomi, you won! You won the Pulitzer!" The world seemed to pause, reality recalibrating around this impossible fact. Me, Naomi West, single mother, once dismissed as a hobbyist, now a Pulitzer Prize. Winner for the book my sister had tried to claim as her creation. Congratulations poured in. From Trevor at Penguin, from Elizabeth at Voices Amplified, from readers around the world. My children burst into the studio after school, eyes wide with excitement, arms full of bodega flowers and handmade cards. "Mom, you're famous!" 9-year-old Ethan exclaimed, launching himself into my arms. Sophie, more reserved at 13 but no less proud, handed me a small velvet box. "We pooled our allowance," she explained. "Open it." Inside was a delicate silver pen nib on a chain, a writer's talisman. I fastened it around my neck with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by their thoughtfulness. That evening, as we celebrated with takeout pizza and ice cream, Sophie asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Have you heard from Aunt Vanessa or Grandma?" I nodded. Grandma sent flowers to the publisher's office. Vanessa sent a book. "Are you still mad at them?" Ethan asked, ice cream smeared across his chin. I considered his question carefully. "I'm not angry anymore," I said finally. "But I've learned important boundaries. Sometimes loving people means keeping a safe distance while they work on themselves." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Like in your book, when you wrote about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation." "Exactly," I smiled, my heart swelling with the realization that my children had not only read my work, but internalized its deeper messages. You can release the anger without erasing the lessons. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I sat at my writing desk and opened a fresh document. The cursor blinked, patient and inviting. I began to type. The Pulitzer. That was the validation the world understood. But becoming the author of my own life, that was mine. The words flowed easily now, no longer wrested from exhaustion or doubt, but emerging from a well of hard-won clarity. The story of how I reclaimed my voice after others tried to silence it. How I rebuilt boundaries after they were violated. How I transformed a painful betrayal into a platform for helping others. Not a story of victimhood, but of agency. Not of retribution, but of reclamation. As dawn broke over the city, I typed the final line of what would become the epilogue to the special edition of Invisible Threads. In the end, what my sister called Vanity publishing became my most authentic act of courage. And when Oprah called, the validation wasn't that I had finally been seen, it was that I had finally, completely seen myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.